He put his fork down slowly, like he was buying time, and I realized I've been waiting for that moment for 3 years. My name is Waverly. I'm 31, a project coordinator at a mid-sized construction firm in Ottawa, and until about 8 months ago, I was the kind of person who kept the peace at every cost. I answered passive-aggressive texts with cheerful replies. I smiled at comments that were designed to sting. I deposited my paychecks into a joint account and told myself that's what partnership looked like. I was wrong about a lot of things, but I was most wrong about that. My husband and I had been together for 5 years and married for 2 when his brother moved back from Vancouver. He'd been out there doing something vague in tech sales, the kind of job that sounds impressive until you ask a follow-up question. He came back with almost nothing, no savings, no apartment lined up, just 2 checked bags and an easy smile that worked on everyone except me. My mother-in-law called it a temporary setback. My husband called it family stepping up. I called it what it was, but only in my head, because I had learned very early in this marriage that saying the obvious thing out loud made me the problem. We were living in a 2-bedroom condo in Kanata that I had put the down payment on before we got married. $22,000 from 5 years of working doubles at a restaurant through my undergrad and saving every bonus from my first real job. My name was on the title. My credit score had carried the mortgage approval. My husband contributed to the monthly payment. I want to be fair about that. But the foundation was mine, even if no one in his family seemed to remember that. The conversation about his brother started on a Tuesday. That detail matters to me because Tuesdays were when I worked from home and I'd had a long call with a contractor that ran over by 40 minutes, and I was tired in a specific, bone-deep way that makes everything feel heavier than it is. My husband came into the home office and leaned against the doorframe the way he did when he wanted something but hadn't figured out how to ask yet. He said his brother needed a place to stay. Just for a bit. A month, maybe 6 weeks, while he sorted out a lease. He said it like it was already decided, like he was informing me rather than asking. I asked where he'd be sleeping. My husband said the second bedroom. I didn't say anything right away. That room was my office, my desk, my monitor, my filing cabinet with every document I'd carefully organized since we moved in. I worked from home 3 days a week. He knew this. I said we'd talk about it later. He said okay. But when I walked out of that room an hour later, his brother was already sitting on our couch watching something on our TV, a duffel bag at his feet, and my husband was in the kitchen making him a sandwich. The month became 2. The 2 became 4. His brother paid nothing toward utilities, nothing toward groceries, nothing toward the internet he used constantly. He was looking for work in the way that involves a lot of sleeping in and playing games online until 2 in the morning. Every time I brought it up, my husband said he just needed more time. Every time I suggested a timeline, his mother called within 24 hours to tell me how important it was to support family during hard times. I started to understand that these calls were not coincidences. The money started disappearing in small ways I almost didn't notice. Almost. I have a habit I developed in my early 20s after a roommate situation that went badly. I check our accounts every Sunday morning with coffee. It's not obsessive, it's just something I do, the same way some people read the news. I know what's in every account, what's scheduled, what's pending. So when a $60 grocery run showed up midweek that I hadn't made, I noticed. When an Uber charge appeared on a Friday night I'd spent alone because my husband said he was visiting his parents, I noticed. When an e-transfer for $200 went out labeled utilities, I noticed, because our utilities come out automatically and that wasn't a bill I recognized. I didn't say anything. I just started keeping a separate document. Receipts, transfers, dates, transfers, dates, amounts. I'm a project coordinator. Documentation is genuinely second nature to me. I made columns, I added notes. Over 6 weeks, I tracked just over $4,000 that had moved out of our joint account in ways I hadn't agreed to. Not enormous, not dramatic, but real. The moment everything crystallized happened on a Sunday afternoon in November, which in Ottawa means gray sky, cold that gets into your jacket, and a particular kind of quiet indoors that makes everything feel a bit too close. My husband's parents came for dinner. My mother-in-law brought a store-bought pie and set it on the counter like it was an offering. His father sat in the living room with his brother and talked about hockey, and I made the entire meal. Roast chicken, roasted vegetables, a salad, bread I'd baked the day before because I was still, even then, trying. Halfway through dinner, my mother-in-law set down her fork and looked at me across the table with an expression I can only describe as performative warmth. She said she just wanted to say how grateful the family was for everything I did, for being so generous with my home. She said some women would have made this difficult, but I had such a good heart. My husband nodded. His brother kept eating. Something in me went very still. She wasn't complimenting me. She was framing a narrative. She was telling the table that what had happened was a gift I had freely chosen to give, and she was doing it publicly so that it would become the agreed-upon version of events, so that if I ever said anything different, I'd be the one rewriting history. I picked up my glass of water. I said, clearly and without any particular emotion, that generosity worked best when it was mutual, and that I was looking forward to having my office back by the end of the month. The table went quiet. My husband looked at me like I'd spoken in another language. His mother's smile didn't fall so much as recalibrate. His brother continued eating, though more slowly. My father-in-law cleared his throat and said something about the chicken being excellent. On the drive back from dropping them off, my husband had insisted on driving his parents home even though they lived 12 minutes away and were perfectly capable. I sat alone in our condo for the first time in months and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not anger, not sadness. Something quieter and more useful. Clarity. I opened my laptop. I wasn't angry when I did it. That's the part I want to be clear about because I think people expect the moment of decision to be dramatic. It wasn't. It was just me at the kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold beside me, opening a spreadsheet I'd already started and making it more formal. I listed every contribution I'd made to this household since we married. My down payment, itemized. My portion of every mortgage payment. The renovation we'd done on the bathroom 2 years ago, which I paid for in full because we'd agreed I'd take a larger share of the equity in exchange. The $4,000 I'd been tracking. All of it. Then I opened a new document and wrote a calm, specific, entirely unemotional email to my husband outlining what I'd found and asking him to explain the transfers. I didn't send it that night. I sat with it. The next morning, I called a financial advisor I'd seen once before when I was setting up my RRSP. She remembered me. I explained the situation. She referred me to a family law lawyer she trusted, a woman with an office near Centertown, and I made an appointment for the following week. I also called my bank separately and asked about my options for the joint account. I wasn't ready to move yet, but I wanted to know what the steps looked like. When my husband came home that night, I gave him the email instead of sending it. Printed in an envelope, I said I wanted him to read it and that we'd talk in the morning. He read it standing in the front hallway, still in his coat. I watched him go through it once, then again more slowly. He said he'd just been trying to help his brother get back on his feet. I said I understood that, and I needed him to understand that he'd used money from our joint account to do it without telling me. And that was not a choice he got to make alone. He said I was making it into something bigger than it was. I said the document disagreed. He didn't sleep well. I know because I did, for the first time in weeks. The appointment with the lawyer was on a Thursday. She had the kind of office that feels deliberately calm. Everything soft-edged and quiet, and she listened without interrupting while I explained the situation. She asked good questions. She was particularly interested in the down payment and the bathroom renovation and whether any of that was documented. I handed her the folder I'd brought. She looked through it for a long moment and said I had been more organized than most people she saw. She explained my options clearly. In Ontario, matrimonial home rules are specific. Even if I'd put in the down payment, the home is shared property on separation. But the bathroom renovation was documented differently. The transfers were documentable. The informal financial arrangement with his brother was, depending on how things unfolded, potentially relevant. I didn't make any decisions that day. I just listened and left knowing what I was working with. The shift came about 2 weeks later, and it didn't come from me. It came from my mother-in-law. She called on a Wednesday evening when my husband was in the shower. I know she knew his schedule. She asked if we could talk, just the two of us, woman to woman. She said she was worried about the family. She said she was worried about the family. She said my husband was stressed. She said she hoped I wasn't going to make this harder than it needed to be. I let her talk for about 2 minutes without interrupting. Then I said that I appreciated her concern and that any further conversations about our finances or living situation needed to include my husband and should probably also include the documentation I'd shared with my lawyer. The silence on her end was a specific kind of silence. The kind that means someone has just realized they've been playing a game with someone who wasn't playing the same game. She said she didn't know I'd spoken to a lawyer. I said there were probably a few things she didn't know. I kept my voice pleasant. I wasn't cruel. I just wasn't available anymore. After we hung up, my husband came downstairs in a towel and asked who I'd been talking to. I said his mother. He went very still. I said she'd called to ask me to keep things quiet. I said I thought he should know that because if his family was coordinating how to manage me, he needed to decide whose side of that conversation he was on. He sat down at the kitchen table. He looked genuinely lost, which I'd stopped having the energy to fix. He said his mother was just scared. I said I understood that, and I was done being the thing people manage their fear with. His brother moved out the following week. There was no formal confrontation. My husband asked him to, quietly, and he went to stay with a friend in Gatineau. I don't know the details, and I didn't ask. What happened next was not a dramatic explosion. It was more like a slow and honest accounting. My husband and I spent 3 weeks having the kind of conversations we should have had 2 years ago. Some of them were painful. He admitted he'd been moving small amounts to help his brother with expenses, food, transit, a few things for a job interview, without telling me because he knew I'd say no and he hadn't wanted the conflict. He said that in the way people say things when they think the confession absolves them. It didn't, but I heard it. I said the problem wasn't that he'd helped his brother. The problem was that he'd decided on my behalf and then let his family frame it as my generosity, so I couldn't object. He didn't have a good answer for that. The twist, when it came, was quiet and almost administrative. My lawyer, in reviewing the financial documentation I'd provided, noticed something I'd flagged almost as an afterthought. For the past 2 years, my mother-in-law had been sending small e-transfers to our joint account labeled things like grocery help and just because. I'd assumed these were kind gestures. My lawyer looked at the pattern and the amounts and suggested I ask my accountant whether these had been reported. They hadn't. My mother-in-law had been using informal family transfers to offset some of her own income tracking, and my account had, without my knowledge, been part of that arrangement. It wasn't enormous, but it was enough. My lawyer sent a formal letter to her through her own representation, simply noting what we'd observed and indicating that we would not be participating in any further informal financial arrangements. My mother-in-law paid back every dollar my husband had transferred to his brother within 10 days. She didn't call me. She didn't send a message. The Interact transfer just appeared, itemized exactly the way my document had been, which told me she'd had the document reviewed and found nothing to dispute. My husband sat across from me the night that happened and said, quietly, that he hadn't realized how clearly I'd been keeping track. I said I'd learned that early. He asked if we were going to be okay. That was the question I'd been sitting with for months. Not angrily, just honestly. And I'd arrived at an answer that surprised even me a little, because it wasn't the answer I'd expected to find. I said I didn't know yet, and that I needed him to understand that okay had a different definition now than the one we'd been operating with. That okay meant both of us knowing what was in our accounts, both of us having the conversation before the decision. Both of us being honest when something was hard instead of routing around the difficulty and hoping I wouldn't notice. He said he could do that. I said I hope so, but I'd also opened my own separate savings account that week and I was keeping it, not as a threat, as a fact. My financial independence was not a negotiating position. We're still together. I want to be honest about that because I think people expect these stories to end one clean way. We're together and it's different, and some days it's hard, and some days it's genuinely better than it was before any of this happened, because we are finally, for the first time, having real conversations instead of careful ones. His brother got a job in February. I heard this through my husband, neutrally, the way you share news that doesn't require a response. I didn't ask for details. My mother-in-law and I have not spoken one-on-one since that phone call. At family events, she is polite and slightly distant, which is an arrangement I find suits us both. The second bedroom is my office again. The desk is exactly where I want it. What I know now that I didn't know 3 years ago is that silence in a household is never neutral. Every time I said nothing, every time I absorbed an imposition and smiled and smoothed it over, I was teaching everyone around me what I was willing to accept. I wasn't keeping the peace. I was setting the terms of my own erasure. Documentation is not unromantic. Knowing what's in your accounts is not cold. Asking for what was taken back is not aggression. These are just what it looks like when someone who's been treated like a resource decides to be treated like a person instead. Money shows you exactly what people believe they're entitled to, and the moment you stop confirming that belief, you find out very quickly who they actually are.